Welcome into another episode of the Deployment Dudes, where we are just a couple of guys being dudes, talking all things deployment. I am your host, Scott Hutter, joined with my esteemed colleague and co-host, Phil Fannin. How you
Hello.
doing today, Phil?
I'm good. And you?
Doing great.
Awesome. So we have a guest. Sean is here. Sean, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you've come from, and what your role has been to date with Kinettix?
Sure. Well, number one, I'm happy to be here on Deployment Dudes. I've watched a lot of your podcasts in the past, and I think they are really serving a purpose in terms of helping clients and helping your audience understand the challenges that they face from a field services deployment, and then conversely the challenges we face in trying to please them and giving them the outcomes that they're looking for. So I have been in the IT services industry for about the last 40 years in all manner of different roles, everything from strategy to transformation, innovation, delivery, operations. So if you can do it in field services, I've probably done it. I've worked for organizations from the largest in the world like GE and Siemens all the way down to garage startups. So I joined Kinettix in November of last year, and Chad asked me to come on and look at a strategy role for him, and basically to help him understand where the organization is at and help him to put together a strategy to help grow the organization and enhance our delivery capabilities to our end clients.
You've been wonderful to work with in your time here, and a jolt of energy to the organization, just a short amount of time. So
Thanks. I appreciate
awesome.
that. I think this is a special organization. The culture here is just unlike any small organization I've been a part of, and I think Chad's done a great job at creating a sustainable culture that makes it a pleasure to work.
Yeah. Absolutely. So today what we're going to talk about is something near and dear to our hearts and our clients. It is change management. Just to kind of kick things off, Phil, if you are a enterprise organization, restaurant, QSR, retail, why should you listen to today's podcast?
That's a good question. Through the eyes of an enterprise or a restaurant or retail, in our industry, when you're out doing field installation services, the world isn't always exactly what you had predicted it would be, right? And you're throwing a lot of curveballs often in the kind of work that we do, simply because infrastructure is never the same everywhere. Facilities are never the same everywhere. Information, the old cliche of the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing situations. And when you're faced with those kinds of issues that occur or challenges that occur in an installation that we're so often involved with, change and documentation around change not just as important for us to be able to make sure that we're capturing it, because it is a true cost to us for sure, but from an end client perspective, understanding and having the detail around what that change is and why, and what are the cost implications to that, and everything else that flows downhill from that perspective. So Sean, I know you've got some pretty strong opinions around change management and really even how debilitating it can be for the end client if it's not properly documented, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, exactly. This cliche I use all the time. It's frustration is a function of expectations. So change management is the constant setting and resetting of expectations to try to avoid that frustration. And it's like when you take a trip. If you're going from Atlanta to Cincinnati, you may have a route that you've planned, but things are going to happen. There's going to be traffic issues. There's going to be state patrolmen, on the highway. Something's going to happen that's going to make you change course. And the key is you've got to understand that going in. So from a client perspective, being able to understand that they have a certain set of expectations when they come to us, they're looking for us to be able to produce an outcome. And no matter how good our intake process is at gathering requirements and understanding what that client is looking for, when we put together that initial scope of work, that scope of work is valid for what we know at that particular point in time. So we do our best to collect the information through site surveys and through planning, and we involve our project managers and our project coordinators, our subject matter experts, in trying to plan that solution as well as we possibly can. But there's inevitably going to be that time when you're doing a cable and you're running into a concrete abutment that you didn't expect, and we're sitting there twiddling our thumbs, wondering what do we do now? So understanding that coming in is just vitally important to both the client and Kinettix. The other piece that we have to think about is when the mechanism for understanding and facilitating change management. Not every change order has a cost associated with it. You know,
Very true.
typically you look at the big three from a change management perspective. It's a technical change, it's a schedule change, or it's a cost change, right? And so all of those have to be carefully considered for impact, both to the client's outcome and to our ability to deliver that outcome. But in some cases, the client may ask for a change that we can do in the previously estimated level of effort, and we may decide there's no cost associated with it. But we still need to track the fact that there was a change, just so the client understands and can communicate to their stakeholders that, guys, perhaps our site survey process is not working as well as it could because we're running into these cabling issues in the roofs of these facilities and the ceilings that we didn't anticipate. So we have to go back and we have to make sure perhaps that those owner operators are making sure that the people who are doing the site surveys are looking for these little idiosyncrasies that are costing additional time and additional effort.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's in our world too. There's a constant battle, if you will call it that, of finding this delicate balance of what's out of scope, or what's changed and what isn't, and how quickly you can maneuver through those things, because most of the time there's tight timelines around installs that we're doing, right? Everything's got a specific budget. Everything has a timeline that it needs to follow. When you get thrown these curveballs or these challenges in the field, who's there to be able to, one, recognize what it is, detail out what it is there a cost implication to it, and then also who's authorized to be able to say, I recognize it, I understand what it is, and yes, you are authorized to go ahead and continue to move forward in order to keep the train running down the track, right? That's a difficult thing to do, is finding that healthy balance of being able to maneuver through those challenges when you're in the midst of them. Don't you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you're on site and just as an example, you can't get to the equipment because it's locked up and the person who has access to it is not available, and you're sitting there waiting to be able to start that work, and you have a schedule that you have to meet because that restaurant has to be back open by 9 o'clock the next morning. The ability to work around that challenge and then be able to have someone who's set up ahead of time to be able to respond to the technicians or the project lead on that account, asking for, what do you want us to do at this particular point? Do you want us to fail this site and come back, which we don't like to do, because what we want to do, again, we're focused on delivering that outcome. But in some cases, those circumstances leave us no choice. But we rather try to be the good corporate citizen and try to figure out a way to facilitate that. But a lot of times that exposes us, and it puts the client in a difficult situation, because if the client doesn't know that that's a change, and we go ahead and, at our discretion, we run that cable drop again, that client might not be able to approve the fact that we did it. They might have preferred that we failed it and we come back at a different time for whatever set of circumstances that it might be. But being able to have that timely feedback, so that we can make a decision and, again, be effective stewards of our clients' services and money, that's critically important.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things in this is to make it so it's not anecdotal or just verbally discussed? It's the documentation, the communication on it. What do you see as really effective tools or best standard operating procedures to make change management effective? Is it issue logs, risk logs, decision trees? What kind of tools do you suggest to keep the train on the track?
So typically, you're going to basically keep track of your change orders or change management your change orders in a change management log itself. Those change orders can constitute a risk or an issue, but you typically want to track the change orders separately. The other thing that being able to do that effectively gives you is that early in deployment cycles, you can look at patterns. And so you can look at patterns that are causing change orders, and then you can change the scope of the remaining parts of the project to eliminate that. So you may have cost impact with 2, 3, 4, or 5 installs, but then you've corrected the problem that for the next 1,500 you don't have to deal with. So again, that's why it's critically important you're tracking the change orders, regardless of whether or not they have a cost, so that you can look at those patterns, change your project as necessary, and then avoid those going forward.
Yeah, and I think around just this entire topic of change order, it can sometimes leave a sour taste in someone's mouth about change order, and to me, this is where the leaning on the partnership really comes into play, and bringing that trust factor. Because let's just say that you're in the midst of an install, and you've got these changes that are happening or need to happen, and you're going and seeking that approval process, and maybe there isn't anybody in line at that particular time. This could be happening in the wee hours of the morning, right? And maybe the customer doesn't have somebody that's there authorized to be able to recognize what it is and say, yep, okay, let's keep going. We've got to make those judgment calls on our own. And so, at the risk of sounding like I'm turning this back on us, I just feel like that's where the partnership is critically important, is to make sure that the customer knows that we're not trying to take advantage of a situation and looking for any and every way to try to just squeeze more money out of a client. And I think sometimes a change, if you don't have the proper trust established, or you don't have a good history of showing the consistent communication and how well these things are logged and documented, and to your point earlier about, just because it's a change doesn't necessarily mean there isn't a cost impact to it. It sometimes can put us in a vulnerable position in terms of whether or not the customer feels like it's valid, or you know what I'm trying to say.
I do, and I would also submit that sometimes the customers are in a situation where they may not have the mechanism to handle out of scope. So we may need to, we recognize an out of scope situation and we go to a client, but the client has also priced that particular opportunity. And so they're maybe operating on a budget, and then we come in with out of scope that nobody expected, and their hands are tied too. So I think that trust factor you're talking about, that's where that comes in. We're not going to come back in and say arbitrarily, oops, this is out of scope, when in the scope it's not defined. We're not trying to make up out of scope situations. The other thing that we've seen that's worked well in the past is if you start running into issues where out of scope becomes a challenge, if you can identify again those patterns, and let's just say those out of scope challenges, boil down to 4 or 5 things that are happening over and over and over. Your change order can go say, you've got pre-approval in these 5 scenarios to proceed with a change order. So you don't have to call, you don't have to get approval. If this situation happens, you're okay. And that means you only have the exceptions then that fall out of that particular process. So that helps in that regard.
Yeah. I also like the fact too that we're willing to, I think we feel pretty darn good about what we believe most customers are going to want us to do. And if there isn't someone in play to be able to authorize, I think we can most of the time evaluate a situation and we can make good, healthy decisions on behalf of the customer with their best interest in mind, even knowing that we may be doing it and moving forward through that change process. And maybe if it is a billable situation, we're on the hook. Maybe we're going to get paid for it. Maybe we won't. But at the end of the day, trying to make good, sound decisions on behalf of the customer to keep the train on the track and moving, like we've been metaphorically speaking. I think we are willing to do that, and we do that. And I don't think it's really come back to hurt us too much.
I would say that the strength of Kinettix and the difference I've seen in this organization is being here compared to other organizations I've been a part of is that you are so adamantly focused on delivering outcomes. So that's what we think about every second of every day. Are we delivering the outcome that our customer expects? And so I've also seen if we make a mistake, we typically make the mistake in favor of delivering that outcome. And to your point, it may not end up being approved by the client. We may already pay the techs for doing the work because we want to make sure they get their money, on time. But that seems to be a risk that we're willing to take. Sometimes it works out in our favor. Sometimes it doesn't. But I think in those customers that we have that we've maintained relationships with for a long period of time, they appreciate that.
Yeah, it's doing right by the customer and making sure when we leave the site, it's in the best condition possible so that they can run their operations and keep serving customers. Okay, Sean, any final thoughts on change management? Outside this podcast where people can learn all about change management, any literature, podcasts, books you've read that have really helped you understand change management and how best to approach it?
Well, certainly the PMP framework has a set of standards as to how change management should be implemented and administered. That's probably the best process framework to use as it relates to how specifically to do it. But I think it boils down to a philosophy of change management. We have to, as a client and as a provider, we have to be thinking about the project delivery in terms of, the big three: technical, schedule, or cost impacts, and understanding how we administrate each one of them, and having that level of trust with the client to know that when we're asking for out of scope or we're asking for change orders, it's not an attempt to nickel and dime. It's an attempt to deliver to their expectations.
Yeah, I may go as far to not call it just a philosophy, but a discipline, right? To make sure you set the right expectations right out of the gate, that these things are fluid, things are going to change, so that when you do have change management, it's not coming unexpectedly.
Exactly. I mean, again, administering that early in a project as opposed to waiting midway through a project or 3/4 of the way through a project when all of a sudden, there's a plethora of change orders hitting and the client's going, what happened? We have to do it early.
Well, Sean, thanks for being a guest today. Really interesting topic. Enjoyed this conversation. I think it's important for our listeners to know how serious we take change management and how not only it impacts our business but theirs as well when doing projects with us. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for the conversation.